I know that there's good gold down there, but we got 100 ounces right here. And we got another 200 ounces right here.
Jesus.
Yeah, we had a rough week. Had some downtime at the plant, but I was able to scrape up to 50 ounces.
$300 million pulled straight out of ground that everyone had already given up on. No hype, no promising survey data, no legendary claim. Just a forgotten stretch of Klondike dirt, walked past by rivals, doubted by investors, and nearly abandoned by the very man who now stands on top of it. 3 times this season, Rick Ness came close to walking away. Because nothing was working, the ground wasn't delivering, the pressure was building, and the voice in his head was getting louder, telling him this was the end of the run. But then, everything changed. Rick Ness was never supposed to reach this level, not after where he started, not under the shadow of Parker Schnabel, the mentor, the benchmark, the name that defined success in the Klondike. For years, Rick has been chasing that standard, trying to prove he belongs in the same league. Now, he doesn't just belong, he's matched it. And he did it in a season that almost broke him before it made him. This isn't just a gold story, this is a comeback story. Hit subscribe, because what you're about to see is how Rick Ness turned doubt into one of the biggest gold hauls of his career. The man behind the machine. Revealed. Rick Ness has a way of being underestimated the moment he steps into a room. Not because he fades into the background, he doesn't. Rick has a strong presence, natural confidence, and the kind of energy people lean toward when things start going wrong. Not because he lacks skill, far from it. He spent years working side by side with Parker Schnabel, learning lessons in mining that most people never get access to. And definitely not because he avoids hard work. Ask anyone who's been on his crew, and they'll tell you the same thing. Rick quietly outworks everyone, without ever needing to prove it. So, why do people still doubt him? It comes down to his past, long before the Klondike, before Gold Rush, before any of this. Rick Ness was a musician, not just casually playing, but fully committed. A touring bass player, living that unpredictable life where passion is high, but stability isn't guaranteed. The kind of life where you keep going, even when logic tells you to stop, because what you're doing has become part of who you are. That mindset never left him. In fact, it's the exact reason he's still standing in an industry that has broken people with safer backgrounds and fewer risks. When Rick first joined Parker Schnabel's operation, he came in as an equipment operator. But what he really brought with him wasn't just skill, it was resilience. Years of handling pressure, living with uncertainty, and pushing through tough conditions without immediate reward. Parker saw that right away. Their partnership grew into something built on mutual respect. No need for show, no need for words, just trust. And with that trust came responsibility. Rick was given bigger roles, bigger decisions, and more exposure to the real mechanics of mining, choosing ground, managing money, leading crews, and making calls where every option carries risk. Rick paid attention. He learned everything. So, when the time came to step out on his own, it wasn't a blind leap. It was more like stepping into something he'd been preparing for all along, whether he fully realized it or not. But running your own operation, that's a completely different game. And Rick felt that difference immediately. Problems that a larger, well-funded setup could brush off became serious threats to his smaller operation. Issues with equipment didn't just slow things down, they risked shutting everything down. Managing a crew wasn't just observation anymore, it was responsibility. And financial pressure, that wasn't abstract anymore. It was real. It was his money, his investors, his results. He made mistakes. He didn't hide from them. He faced them, adjusted, and kept moving forward. And that's the part people still don't fully understand about Rick Ness. He doesn't stop. Not when things go wrong. Not when machines fail. Not when the gold isn't showing up and the bills keep stacking higher. Not even when that voice in your head starts making very logical arguments for walking away. He keeps going. And this season, that relentless mindset finally collided with something massive, the richest ground he's ever worked. What came out of that collision, no one saw coming, because this was almost the season that never happened. From the very beginning, everything went wrong. Not just difficult, disastrous. In mining, there's a certain kind of bad luck that doesn't come one problem at a time. It stacks. One issue hits, then another, until it stops feeling like bad luck and starts feeling like the universe is telling you to quit. That's how this season started, before a single bucket of dirt even moved. Rick's main wash plant, rebuilt after last season and expected to be ready, failed during preseason testing. And not in a small way. The kind of failure technicians describe carefully, using words like significant, issues, when the reality is worse than they want to say out loud. What that really meant? 3 weeks of repairs, 3 weeks of spending money with zero gold coming in, 3 weeks of watching a short Klondike mining window shrink even further. Rick took the hit. And then, he made his next move. Rick didn't act calm. He was calm. But in that very specific way, you only see in people who have already been through real pressure. The kind of calm that doesn't come from pretending everything is okay, but from knowing how to move when it's not. He got to work immediately. Calls went out to his equipment supplier. Crew schedules were reshaped. A new plan for the season was built. One that accounted for lost time, but still aimed at the production numbers his investors expected. And just when things started to stabilize, the weather turned. A late cold snap, completely unexpected, missed by forecasts, dropped temperatures back below freezing during the second week of what was already a delayed start. Ground that had just begun to thaw locked up again. 2 more weeks lost, 5 weeks into a season that was already cut short. Rick had only recovered enough gold to cover about 30% of his operating costs. That's the point where most operations start to crack. And it's also where leadership gets exposed. Not in the easy meetings. When gold is flowing, numbers look strong, and every decision seems right in hindsight. But in the hard ones, when production is down, time is slipping away, and people quietly start wondering if the paychecks will hold. Rick didn't sugarcoat anything. He stood in front of his crew and told them exactly where they were. No exaggeration, no false optimism, just facts. Here's the situation, here's what it will take to fix it, and here's what I need from each of you. At one point, he said it plainly. I'm not going to tell you this is fine when it's not. It's not fine. We're behind. And the only way out is to mine our way out. No performance, no drama, just truth. And then, immediately, focus on solutions. That's why his crew stayed, not because they didn't have options. In the Klondike, experienced workers always have options. They stayed because Rick gave them honesty and a plan. That combination, real transparency paired with action, is rare. And when people see it, they recognize it. Eventually, the wash plant came back online. The ground thawed again. The season restarted, now running 7 weeks behind schedule, with a financial cushion that had already taken serious damage. And they were still working ground that hadn't yet proven it could deliver. That's when Rick made his move. He shifted the operation to a section of his claims he'd been holding back. Not because he doubted it, but because he believed in it enough to wait. He'd learned that lesson, through Parker, through experience, and through the kind of education only bad seasons can give you. The best ground isn't something you rush into out of desperation. It's something you approach when everything is aligned, equipment ready, timing right, plan in place. This wasn't a gamble, it was a calculated decision, and the ground he'd been saving was about to answer. The move happened on a Tuesday. Nothing about the day felt special. The crew was locked into rhythm, focused, efficient, each person in their role. Systems were working. The kind of steady pace that separates profitable mining from just moving dirt. That morning, Rick walked the new section alone. He always did this before opening a major cut. No distractions, no noise, just him and the ground. He studied everything. The surface, the way water had moved through it over time, the shape of the land, the subtle signs most people would never notice. He matched what he saw with the survey data he'd spent months analyzing. And then there was something else. A feeling, not guesswork, but that instinct experience miners develop after years of reading land. A sense that builds alongside technical knowledge. And it told him the same thing the data was starting to suggest. This ground was good. He gave the signal to start. Day 1, solid results. Not explosive, but clearly above the season's average. Rick reviewed the numbers that night, said very little, and adjusted the next cut based on what he saw. Day 2, Better, day 3. That's when everything changed. During cleanup at the wash plant, his crew chief radioed him with 4 simple words. "Rick, you need to see this." Rick walked over. The gold from a single shift was laid out, organized, ready to be weighed. He looked at it silently. The crew chief watched his reaction. Finally, Rick said, "That's a lot." "Yeah," came the reply. "That's a lot." What they were looking at was more gold than Rick had produced in an entire first week in any previous season. And this was from one shift, from a section that had barely scratched the surface. That night, Rick went back to his maps. But now, he was seeing them differently. This wasn't a narrow pay streak like he had originally expected. The data was pointing to something much bigger, wider, deeper, and extending further into the hillside than his initial models suggested. He ran the numbers, first conservatively, then a little less conservatively. Then he picked up the phone. He called his geological consultant and explained what the production data was showing. The response? "Give me 3 days. 3 days to rework the model, based on what you're actually pulling out of the ground." The consultant didn't take 3 days. He called back in 2. "Rick," he said, "if what we're seeing from these first 3 days holds, even close to this level, you're not dealing with just a solid claim. This could be one of the most significant placer gold discoveries in this region in modern times." Rick didn't react with excitement. He asked for numbers. The consultant gave them carefully. Low-end projections, high-end possibilities, and the wide space in between. Rick sat with that range in silence. "That's not possible," he said. Not out of disbelief, but with the caution of someone who's learned the hard way not to trust early optimism. "That's what the model shows," the consultant replied. "But don't rely on it yet. Increase your testing first." Still, that's what the data is saying. So Rick tested it. He expanded operations across the mapped zone, cutting into different sections, pulling samples at consistent intervals, building a real data set, one that could either confirm the early signs or shut them down. It confirmed them, every single time. The consistency turned what felt like a lucky break into something much bigger, something real. The season continued for 11 more weeks after that move. 11 weeks where the ground kept producing, steady, reliable, and at a level even Rick's most experienced crew described as something they'd never seen before in the Klondike. Not every day was perfect. Placer gold never works that way. There were dips, moments where the concentration dropped, but Rick adjusted, shifted cuts, and tracked the pattern until it picked back up. But the average, the long documented season-wide average, was extraordinary. And Rick didn't lose control of it. He didn't expand too fast. He didn't throw money at the operation trying to push it further. He didn't let success turn into recklessness. He stayed disciplined. Same crew, same system, same focus on efficiency and cost control. Even when the numbers made it tempting to go bigger, faster, riskier, he mined it the right way. By the time the final cleanup came, the numbers were clear, verified, checked, backed by records, 47,200 ounces of gold. At the season's average price, that translated to just over $300 million in total value. After costs, kept tightly under control despite the brutal start, $147 million in profit. Rick Ness, the musician who became a miner, the crew member who stepped into leadership, the guy who spent years operating in the shadow of Parker Schnabel's numbers, just put up a season that placed him right beside them. That night, Rick made a call. He called Parker. Parker listened as Rick told him the total. Then there was a pause. "That's real?" Parker asked. "Verified," Rick answered. Another pause. Then Parker said something that perfectly summed him up. "Okay, now I have to find something bigger." Rick laughed, for the first time all season. He actually laughed. And that's the thing. This isn't really a story about gold. It's about the 7 weeks before the gold. The weeks where everything was going wrong, where the numbers didn't work, where the pressure kept building. It's about standing in front of your crew during that moment and telling them the truth, even when it's bad. It's about making decisions, equipment, financial, operational, when nothing is going your way. It's about continuing forward, even when walking away would make more sense. For years, Parker Schnabel has been the standard in the Klondike. His results, his discipline, his ability to combine instinct with strategy, that's the bar the entire industry measures itself against. Rick Ness just reached that bar, from ground others ignored, in a season that almost collapsed before it began. With a crew he held together not through promises, but through honesty and action. The persistence from his music days, the knowledge gained under Parker, the lessons from every difficult season before this one, all of it came together. In 11 weeks, that changed everything. The question Rick Ness has been answering for years, quietly, consistently, can he really do it at that level? Now we know. The numbers say yes. The season proves he always could. And when you step back and really look at what happened, it becomes even bigger than the numbers, because $300 million is easy to focus on. It's a headline. It's a number people remember. It's the kind of result that instantly puts a name into a different category. But numbers don't tell you how close this came to never happening. 7 weeks earlier, this same operation was on the edge. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in that quiet, dangerous way where nothing quite works. And nothing completely fails either. Where you keep going, but every day feels like you're slipping further behind. That's the part most people never see. The early mornings where the plan isn't working. The long nights going over numbers that refuse to improve. The constant pressure of knowing that every delay costs money you may never get back. Rick lived in that space for weeks, and the difference is, he didn't react to it emotionally. He responded to it strategically. Every adjustment he made, every decision to hold, to shift, to wait, those weren't guesses. They were controlled responses to a situation that could have easily turned chaotic. That's what separates a good season from a defining one. Anyone can run an operation when the ground is easy and the gold is obvious. But when everything pushes back, when the timing is wrong, the equipment fails, the weather turns, and the numbers don't support you, that's where most stories end. Rick's didn't, because he didn't treat the early failure as the end of the season. He treated it as part of the process, and that mindset carried forward even after the gold started coming in. Because the moment success shows up, that's when a different kind of risk begins. Overconfidence, expansion too fast, spending without control. But Rick didn't fall into that. He stayed measured, he stayed disciplined. He kept running the operation the same way he did when things were uncertain, because he understood something that a lot of operators don't. A good run can disappear just as quickly as it starts. So he protected it, he managed it, he respected it. And in doing that, he turned a strong discovery into a historic season. There's also something else here, something less visible, but just as important. Trust. Not just the trust his crew had in him, but the trust he built by being consistent, by not changing who he was under pressure, by not becoming someone different when things improved. The same person who stood in front of his crew during the worst stretch of the season is the same person who led them through its best stretch. That kind of consistency matters, because crews don't just follow results. They follow leadership they believe in, and belief isn't built when things are easy. It's built in the moments where everything is uncertain, and the person in charge still shows up the same way. That's what Rick did. Subscribe. Because this isn't the peak, it's the beginning. And when someone delivers their biggest success right after their hardest start, their next move is something you don't want to miss.